two brothers once moved more than 60 tons of cocaine, and later, they became the very men who recorded El Chapo, the most dangerous drug lord in the world. But what haunts me the most is the price they had to pay. If you want to know how thin the line between survival and betrayal can be, leave a like so the algorithm knows you're watching this kind of story. On November 30th, 2008, two identical men walked through the doors of the federal building in downtown Chicago. No handcuffs, no escorting officers. They were not under arrest. They came to surrender. Inside their coat pockets were small silver tapes, evidence that could bring down an empire. The twins, Pedro and Margarito Flores, were only 27 years old, and just months earlier, they had been sitting at the same table with Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán, the most wanted man on the planet. For 3 years, they had managed the largest drug pipeline in Chicago's history, more than 60 tons of cocaine, tens of millions of dollars in monthly circulation, mountain villas in Mexico with dancing horses, striped tigers, imported supercars, and cash stacked so deep it was weighed instead of counted. And every shipment that crossed the border meant another nameless life lost to overdose. Yet that day, under the cold fluorescent lights, the brothers carried no money, no lawyers, only the secret recordings. On one of those tapes, El Chapo's voice came through the satellite line. Soft, casual, amigo. Then came the negotiation. Pedro Flores bargained for 20 kilos of heroin, $55,000 down to $50,000 per kilo. A normal business call between partners, but to the DEA, it was gold. The lab later confirmed the heroin was more than 90% pure. Among over 70 recordings, 2 contained Guzmán Loera's voice, the first direct evidence against the Sinaloa boss while he was still free. 2 phone calls, and an empire began to crumble. And for the twins, that was the beginning of another kind of sentence, one that would fall on their own family. Their father would disappear forever in Sinaloa, becoming the price of their betrayal. That story didn't start in the mountains of Mexico, but in a cramped kitchen in Little Village, the Mexican immigrant neighborhood in Chicago. In the spring of 1981, federal agents raided the home and arrested their father, Margarito Flores Sr., for possession of 11 pounds of heroin. His pregnant wife begged them not to take him away in front of her. 3 months later, she gave birth to twins, Pedro and Margarito Jr. For 8 years, their father sat behind bars, while the boys grew up with only one picture on the altar, a man in a federal orange jumpsuit. When he returned, the first lesson he taught wasn't about morals, but about trade. In the garage behind their old house on South Homan Avenue, the father began to teach. The boys crawled into car engines, searching for small plastic bundles that smelled of gasoline and glue. "Use your small hands, gently," he said. "That's where we hide the money and the product." A triple beam scale sat on the dining table instead of toys. They learned to count in grams, to wrap with tape, to stay silent out of fear. Growing up between the smell of fuel and the sound of metal against gas tanks, they were told it was the family business, a legitimate enterprise in its own way. Their first trips took them through Texas, Arizona, and down into Mexico. The father pointed at maps, marked checkpoints, and talked about the farming towns along the road. While other fathers taught baseball, he taught geography through trafficking routes. Each town became a life lesson. Texans were polite. The Nuevo Laredo crossing had its tricks, and at the Sonora checkpoint, you had to know who to pay. It was an underground university of smuggling, and they graduated before finishing middle school. As the trips got longer, the twins began to see the system beyond their family. Middlemen, Sinaloa connections, local drivers, all parts of a machine they understood completely. That knowledge was what the DEA would later call a PhD in trafficking. In Little Village, it was simply the lesson of survival. Their oldest brother Armando taught something different. He wanted the twins to stay away from the Latin kings, to avoid knives and guns, to use their brains instead. From his car dealership in Cicero, Armando led a major distribution cell, laundering cash through car invoices and managing everything by phone and code. He didn't want his brothers to be gangsters. He wanted them to be businessmen in the shadows. But in the summer of 1998, federal agents took down his operation, and Armando was sentenced to 5 years in prison. His entire network of clients and suppliers collapsed. At 17, Pedro and Margarito stepped up. A former employee connected them to a supplier from Mexico, who then introduced new clients. Within months, the twins were coordinating their first shipments. They knew every detail: warehouse selection, packaging, escape routes. What others learned through blood, they inherited from family. And from that cramped garage on South Homan Avenue, the twins built a massive underground enterprise. By 1999, while their friends were just looking for their first jobs, Pedro and Margarito already owned 5 houses, a fleet of sports cars, and warehouses running non-stop. They traded with partners in Mexico, Milwaukee, St. Louis, and across the Great Lakes. Thousands of kilos of cocaine moved through their hands each month. They worked carefully, keeping records like accountants, ledgers that would later become key evidence when they cooperated with federal agents. When questioned, Pedro simply said, "Around 1998, we started distributing cocaine in Chicago." Calm, flat, as if describing a business career. Federal reports later estimated their Chicago cell handled between 1,500 and 2,000 kilos each month. 2 men in their 20s managing a supply chain so efficient that investigators compared it to Amazon. And that was only the beginning. A kidnapping was coming, an event that would take them straight into the mountains, face to face with the man the world called El Chapo. And just as fate would have it, destiny didn't wait long. In 2005, the Flores twins had grown so powerful that every major supply route in Chicago passed through their hands. Thousands of kilos each month, cash buried under concrete floors, private drivers, bodyguards, fake passports. They thought they had reached absolute safety, until one name returned: Guadalupe Lupe Ledesma. Lupe had once been their father's partner and a bridge to the Sinaloa cartel. One day, he appeared with a cold expression and a number that stunned Pedro Flores. $10 million. You owe us. Pedro thought it was a joke. Every deal had been documented. There could be no mistake. But Lupe wasn't joking. He demanded their warehouses, homes, and client lists as payment. The brothers refused. And that was when everything collapsed. A meeting was arranged on the outskirts of Culiacan. Pedro went alone, thinking it was just a negotiation. When he stepped inside the small house, the door shut behind him. 15 guns pointed at his chest. He was beaten, hooded, and taken away. 15 days. That was how long no one in Chicago knew whether Pedro Flores was still alive or already gone. In the dark room, Pedro was beaten, starved, and tied to a steel post. No one explained why. Each day he received only a sip of water and a hard piece of bread. When he thought he would be buried in the desert, he heard footsteps stop at the door. The guard untied him and shoved a plane ticket into his hand. "Your brother is trying to get you out. If you are lucky, you will see the sun." In Chicago, Margarito Flores went mad. He had once bought his brother back from a local gang with $2.4 million worth of cocaine. But this was the cartel. Different rules. No bargaining, only blood. Everyone said, "If you go up the mountain to see Chapo, you are committing suicide." But Margarito decided to go anyway. He gathered every ledger, the accounting books that listed each deal, every day, every contact. That was the only weapon he had. He hired a young Sinaloa pilot to fly an old Cessna. The runway was a narrow strip of dirt through the trees. When the plane touched down, armed men rushed in. No words were spoken, only gestures. Margarito was led up dusty slopes to a block of cold concrete buildings. And there, a short, stocky man with a slight rightward tilt to his gaze stepped out. No introduction was needed. Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán. The boss looked at Margarito for a long time, then said slowly, "You know, people who come up here often do not come back." Margarito opened his bag, pulled out the notebooks, and flipped each page. If you want to know whose money is where, it is all here. We do not owe Lupe. El Chapo flipped through a few pages, reading names, dates, and amounts. He went quiet, then let out a soft laugh. Lupe's men are wrong. He ordered Pedro released that very night. At sunrise, Pedro was dumped in the desert, his hands still bound, but with a hidden key sewn into his shoe. Next to him was a small phone and a short message. "You are lucky. Your brother saved you." When the brothers reunited, Margarito said only one line: "You stink." Then he hugged his brother, sweat and desert dust mixing into a scent they would never forget. After that, he told him, "I met Chapo Guzmán." A few weeks later, it was Pedro's turn to fly up the mountain. That trip changed everything. The Cessna skimmed over Sinaloa's jungle and landed on a strip between two hills. Below was a camp with armed guards, Mexican flags, and pickup trucks marked AG. At the gate, Pedro saw a sight that stopped his blood. A man chained to a tree, his body covered in wounds, flies buzzing. "That is the man who lied to the boss," a guard said. Pedro walked on in silence. In a cool, tin-roofed building, Chapo waited, wearing a t-shirt and jeans, two walkie-talkies beside him. He looked at Pedro and smiled. "An American, huh? Jeans, chains, Hollywood style." Then he laughed loud. The tension eased. Pedro produced from his pocket a small gift box, the outer wrapper showing a Viagra logo. Inside was a new pair of jeans. Chapo laughed heartily. In a world of suspicion, that laugh saved both brothers. From that moment, they were no longer merely clients. They became men of Sinaloa. They were allowed to call Chapo directly and receive shipments straight from western Mexico. Over the next 3 years, from 2005 to 2008, they turned themselves into the cartel's logistics hub in the United States. Chicago became a national transit point. Each month, between 1,500 and 2,000 kilos of cocaine passed through them. Half stayed in Chicago. The rest went to New York, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Vancouver. For every ton shipped, millions of dollars flowed back to Mexico by truck, train, and sometimes in live cattle to fool customs. Margarito later said, "We did not just sell product, we ran the whole supply chain." And that was true. They controlled every step, from packaging and transport to currency exchange. At their peak, their revenue topped $10 million a month, comparable to a Fortune 500 company. But closeness to El Chapo brought fear. They saw people tortured for suspected betrayal, and bodies hung along mountain roads as warnings. At every meeting and in every message, they knew that a single mistake could wipe out their entire family. That was when Pedro began to think about the future. His wife was pregnant. He knew he lived inside an empire with no exit. To leave, he would have to do what no one in the cartel had dared: betray Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán. In 2008, the twins' world started cracking from within. Pedro, now married and expecting his first child, looked around his mountain villa. Gold, cars, bodyguards. And suddenly, it all meant nothing. He realized what they were building was not an empire, but a diamond prison. Each day, they shipped tons of cocaine to the United States, and each night, they heard of people killed in turf wars. Then the air in the cartel turned to the smell of gunpowder. In January 2008, Alfredo Beltran Leyva was arrested, one of Sinaloa's co-founders. Chapo blamed the Beltran brothers for betrayal. The Beltrans declared war. Bodies piled up in Culiacán, Mazatlan, and Chihuahua. Sinaloa split in two. Pedro and Margarito found themselves in the middle of that slaughter. They did business with both Chapo and the Beltrans, so there was no safe place. Pick the wrong side and you would die. Pick the right side and you would still die for knowing too much. On one inventory run, Margarito told his brother, "I think we have to do something right, at least once." Pedro asked, "What is right? Turn ourselves in to the FBI?" That question, months later, became reality. In October 2008, they secretly contacted the DEA in Mexico City. The meeting took place in a high-security hotel. They were not handcuffed and no arrest warrants were issued. They offered to cooperate, but they did not ask for reduced sentences or demand protection. They said, "We will work from the inside." The DEA found it hard to believe. There was no precedent for operators of their scale to be active and yet offer to become double agents. But when agents saw the ledgers, day by day, kilo by kilo, every contact, they realized the twins held the keys to an entire empire. A few days later, the brothers returned to Mexico as if nothing had happened. From that moment, every call and every meeting was recorded. They hid bugs in belt straps and turned on recorders during meetings with Chapo's, Mayo's, and Beltran's contacts. There were 54 official recordings, though the true number may have exceeded 70. Chapo was the biggest target, but the boss was extremely cautious. He only called when necessary and used a relay system of 3 phones. So Pedro and Margarito devised a risky plan: deliberately accept a heroin shipment, and then feign outrage over price to force Chapo to call directly to negotiate. That day, Pedro sat in the villa in Sinaloa with a recorder running. El Chapo's voice came through. "Amigo, 20 kilos, 55,000 per kilo." Pedro: "Quality is good, but the price is high." "I want 50,000. Chapo laughed and agreed, unaware that the entire call was being captured by the DEA in real time. 2 calls, 1 overthrow. It was the first time in history that El Chapo's real voice was recorded while he was still free. After hanging up, Pedro told his brother, "I just signed my own death warrant." Margarito nodded. "But at least this time, it will save your child." On November 30th, 2008, the twins walked into the federal courthouse in Chicago and surrendered voluntarily. No escape, no conditions. They handed over every recording, every document, every ledger, what the DEA later called the most complete picture of Sinaloa operations ever captured. The first night in the holding cell, they slept soundly, for the first time in years. Pedro told the jailer, "You know, today I feel freer than ever." But that freedom lasted only one night, because just weeks later, the cartel answered, early in 2009. While the DEA was opening dozens of prosecutions based on their testimony, in Mexico, one man disappeared: Margarito Flores Sr., their father. He told his sons he was only going back to Mexico for a few days to take care of personal business. Agents advised him not to go. He nodded, smiled, and went anyway. 3 days later, his car was found abandoned on the edge of the Sinaloa desert. On the windshield was a note: "The little rat talked. The father rat paid the price." His body was never found. The brothers heard the news while in a meeting with the DEA. The room fell silent. Pedro stood up and punched the wall. Margarito said only one line: "If we stop now, father died for nothing." And they continued. They named every shipping route, every warehouse, every middleman. By August 2009, 54 people were indicted in federal court in Chicago, including Guzmán, Mayo, and Beltran. An expanded indictment later added dozens more names and dismantled a large portion of Sinaloa's U.S. network. In 2012, the Beltran-Leyva cartel, fractured after Arturo Beltran was killed in Cuernavaca. Guzmán remained free, but the Flores brothers' recordings had become a blade driven into the heart of the empire. In January 2015, the twins were brought to court for sentencing. 6 years in solitary under the Witness Protection Program, living in darkness, and now they stood before Judge Ruben Castillo. Prosecutors asked for a sentence of 10 to 14 years instead of life, citing unprecedented cooperation. Judge Castillo spoke bluntly: "You poisoned this country, but without you, we would never have caught Guzmán." Pedro bowed his head, voice breaking. "No words are enough to apologize. We destroyed too much." Margarito added, "I just want my child to grow up without having to lower their head because they share the Flores name." They received 14 years, credited for time served, meaning they would be released before 2020. When they left the court, they knew the real sentence never ended. It was a sentence to live in fear for life. After the sentence, the DEA and the FBI used their testimony to build the largest prosecution in U.S. history. United States versus Joaquin Guzmán Loera. In December 2018 in Brooklyn, Pedro Flores entered the courtroom wearing a blue prison jumpsuit, hair shaved, and his wedding ring on. He was no longer a $10 million a month boss. He was a numbered witness. For 3 hours, he described in detail how the cartel operated: warehouses in New York, money laundering through bakeries, railways, parcels, even using produce trucks. He described Chapo answering calls, ordering executions, and how money flowed back to Mexico. Prosecutors played the recording. Amigo, 20 kilos, 55,000 per kilo. The courtroom was silent. Chapo's real voice filled the speakers as he sat a few meters from Pedro and sneered. 3 months later, El Chapo was convicted on all counts. He received life plus 30 years and forfeiture of $12.6 billion. El Chapo, who had escaped Mexican prisons twice, was transferred to ADX Florence, the highest security prison in the United States, where he will die behind concrete walls, held in isolation 23 hours a day. When Pedro heard the news, he said only, "We did not win. We only survived a little longer." Outside the bars, the world kept turning. In 2020, the brothers were released. They left federal prison like ghosts. No one knew where they lived or what names they used. Margarito chose an unusual path. He went public and ran training sessions for police on cartel networks, sharing how to spot concealed containers and laundering routes. He said, "I helped crime grow. Now I want to help stop it." Some officers shook his hand. Others quietly walked away. Not everyone was ready to learn from someone who once did the worst. Pedro chose silence. He lived anonymously, made no statements, and avoided social media. Rumors said tens of millions of dollars remained unfound, hidden in walls, buried under Sinaloa ranches, or held in anonymous accounts in Panama. Authorities never confirmed those claims. In 2021, their wives, Viviana Lopez and Valery Gaitan, were arrested for money laundering. Both pleaded guilty and admitted spending hidden assets on luxury cars, jewelry, and foreign travel. The court gave light sentences because of cooperation and small children. In 2023, Margarito appeared at a conference in Illinois before more than 200 police officers. He lectured on how the cartel used legitimate businesses to hide money. Under the lights, his face showed deep lines. The man who once haunted the DEA had become an instructor. He said, "I ask no one for forgiveness. I only want that each time this story is told, one child will understand that the fastest way to riches is the shortest path to hell." It was a late repentance, but the truest thing he had ever said. And even though they were free, both men knew that freedom would never be complete. Every time they started their car, every time a window rattled in the night, they still had to ask themselves, is today the day they find us? They betrayed El Chapo, and they survived. But in the underworld, survival is only a slower way to die. But out there, the name Guzmán still lives on. Los Chapitos, the sons of the kingpin, took over the legacy. Ivan Archivaldo and Jesus Alfredo managed the routes through Sonora, while Ovidio oversaw fentanyl labs in Culiacán, producing tons each month, up to 50 times stronger than heroin. One federal indictment in 2023 stated, "The sons of Guzmán have transformed Sinaloa from a cocaine cartel into a global fentanyl empire." The irony is that the very files and testimonies from the Flores brothers between 2008 and 2012 were later used to redraw the cross-border trafficking routes, helping the DEA trace Ovidio Guzmán Lopez in 2023. Ovidio was captured in Culiacán and extradited to Chicago, the same city where, 15 years earlier, his father had called to negotiate with Pedro Flores. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, between 2010 and 2020, more than 42% of arrests linked to the Sinaloa cartel had traceable ties to the Flores brothers' testimony or data. In other words, even though they left the game, the ripples continued. And every time the DEA intercepted a shipment, someone in Mexico paid the price. Not everyone praised them. Some DEA agents called them the bravest witnesses in the history of America's drug war. The underworld, however, despised them. They betrayed their own blood. In federal prisons, Flores had even become a proper noun, used to describe anyone who both trafficked and cooperated. Yet one thing cannot be denied. Their story changed how the US government understood the mechanics of a cartel. Before the Flores files, the DEA viewed Sinaloa as a loose armed group. Afterward, they saw the structure clearly. Financial departments, logistics, marketing, even human resources, operating like a corporation. From then on, many anti-drug operations began to attack economically, not just with bullets. They followed invoices, shell companies, and commercial containers. A former prosecutor remarked, "Without the Flores brothers, the United States would have needed another 10 years to realize that cartels operate like Amazon." But the price of that understanding was a father who vanished, and two brothers condemned to live as ghosts among the living. After their release in 2020, Pedro and Margarito Flores stepped into a world they no longer belonged to. No friends, no identity, no home. They were given new names and moved every few months. Some sources said they once lived in Utah, then Tennessee, and later in an eastern suburb, where, if anyone asked too many questions, they would disappear that same night. Margarito chose to face it. He used his real name, lectured police officers, and tried to repay his debt through knowledge. Pedro chose silence. People said he lived simply, worked manual jobs, raised his child, but no one was sure. The FBI never confirmed their whereabouts. Even the agents who once protected the twins admitted, "I don't know where they are anymore. Maybe they don't want anyone to know." After El Chapo disappeared from the stage, the young ones took his place. The cartel names changed, the routes changed, but the lesson stayed the same. No one is ever truly the boss, only those who have not yet been betrayed. Pedro once said in his final interrogation, "We don't want forgiveness. We just want to live long enough to tell our story, so others won't repeat it." That sentence, stripped of guilt, sounds almost like a prayer. Because they understood, no one truly escapes their own empire. Even if you take down El Chapo, his shadow still sits in your mind every night. Two brothers who once moved 60 tons of cocaine and later recorded El Chapo, the most dangerous drug lord in the world. But what haunts me most is not the calls or the money. It is the price of their choices. Betrayal or survival. Sometimes, they are only one breath apart. If you want to understand the world where loyalty can cost a life, leave a like so the algorithm knows you're still here, listening until the very end.